as groovy as it gets.
Oprah, Can You Hear Me? Oprah vs. Donald 2020 is a conversation by Julie Benetti and Susan Barbaro and a production of EI Alliance, copyright 2019. America is courtesy of New Threads off their new album, Felonious Wilma. Want to start off this podcast by thanking President Donald Trump for his shout out to our podcast series in our book. Donald J. Trump, do you stand with him? Who does he stand with? The science and energy behind Trump. This is Julie, and I'm here with Susan, and we were excited when one of our followers notified us and kind of commented with our Twitter handle in alignment with Donald Trump's tweet, where he said, so great to watch and listen to all these people who write books and talk about my presidential campaign and so many other things related to winning and how I should be doing it. As I take it all in, I then sit back, look around, and say, gee, I'm in the White House, and they're not. I find that very humorous and interesting, and just wanted to say thanks for the shout-out, because our book really does talk about, you know, what he did to win, how he won in the energy, because we look at energy,
right? It's
not politics.
Political, right? And so what's interesting about it is when you look at the tweet and when he, a lot of people that responded had to do with his comment about, I then sit back, look around and say, gee, I'm in the White House and they're not. I mean, and that can be interpreted in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. In that, what we find funny is, number one, is we did talk about how he won. The book talks about how he won.
And also how he's doing it, which is funny because you can't see my hands, but I'm doing those
quotations.
Yeah, quotations in the air. We use those words, so,
And so what's interesting, and I'm going to use the word interesting because I could take this and I can get very personal and say, his comment about he's in the White House and they're not. And I'm not going to interpret it, but I can, just as I think it, I can do a whole podcast on how that could be interpreted. Mm. So what I found interesting, because this isn't just about Trump, our podcast, it's also about Oprah, and it's about energy.
Right.
And so, of course, when I looked at that, I went back to the book, and I looked at a few different things, and I was like, there's a few different things here that relate. So I don't know where you were going, Julie, but this is kind of where I'm going with it. Okay. So in our book, we have different principles that we highlighted. And the ninth one was Albert Einstein believed that, quote, we can't solve a problem while we're in the same level of thinking that created it, end quote. And the reason I think that's really important in light of what he said is because we did not approach any of this the way he approached it or the way anyone else approached it. Mm. And so therefore, we're looking at it with a whole different perspective. Mm-hmm. We're not sitting here with, I'm going to say it, Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and everybody else who's sitting there and bashing them. I mean, I'm not supporting them, but I'm not interested in bashing them either because that doesn't get me anywhere. That just keeps me in the name-calling energy.
Exactly.
And I think what's more fascinating to discuss is what he's doing from an energetic standpoint, which is what we are focusing on. And that one quote is interesting because I'm not interested in sitting in the White House. I've read a lot of things and I've heard, stories about other presidents. Some of them thrived there. Some of them thought they were imprisoned. Mm. It was like very much feeling, separated from everyone and kind of very lonely. And a lot of them really didn't do very well there. So it's interesting because he's in the White House and we're not. Mm-hmm. And I have no aspiration of running for the White House.
Me neither.
Yet I do have a huge, insatiable appetite to understand the energy. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing I want to say. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go to the second one, which, and I got to put on my glasses, it's number 10, which says physics challenges that when you observe something like a stone, for example, you are observing the effects of the stone upon yourself. So I'm just going to say this, and then you can go crazy with it. Mr. Trump, if you have listened to these podcasts and you read this book, you have changed. You have no choice but to change, because that's what science, the law of that scientific principle states. So I'm going to just throw this out there. You know, we talked about Oprah running for president because it's changing her habit, her norm of dealing with dysfunction and the self-help. It's like, okay, put your money where your mouth is and move out of that. I need to fix everyone, and be the example of someone who's been fixed and moves forward real strong. And the other side of that is, I would say to Donald Trump, good luck. What are you doing? You're doing this. He's actually stuck the way we said Oprah's stuck. He's doing the same thing over and over and over again. He's got to be bored as anything in this presidency. He throws, you know, what he does all the time. He's almost like the gerbil caught in the wheel. He's doing the same thing. And now that we've put this out there and he's listened, because we can tell by the tweet, he's changed. He has to have changed. So what is he going to do now? What is he going to do now?
Really good question. And we all change every day. Yet in this situation, it's funny because I can't help but feel, I mean, this has been a really cool case study to watch. It's great. I didn't have to run for president. I didn't have to go out there and do anything. But I can look at science, which scientists already tell us, and look at relationships and utilize all, you know, the background that I have to understand with my intuition, you know, what's going on and what the maneuverings are and what the manipulations are. And I find this tweet, you know, very interesting, yet also very manipulative, because he can be the hamster on the wheel, but he can also, I mean, he's done in the past, he's shown what he's done in the past. He can also turn around and pivot from that. So you can get trapped in that and say, oh, well, because I want to say, you can get trapped in that and say, oh, he's, you know, saying, I'm here, you're not, blah, 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 blah. Is he really? I mean, that's a trigger phrase because it's in quotes. That's a trigger phrase. And you mentioned, because I wasn't looking at Twitter, but you mentioned the responses were, well, he's got to be running the country and he should be focusing on other stuff. And why is he commenting on that? I think that what they said,
the narcissism, and they were saying that you have a job to do the job.
So, you know, what I wanted to say in response, and I kept on saying, hurry up, we're going to do this podcast, was that it's really funny because if you go to an office and you have a water cooler conversation and somebody talks about something and you go back to your office, you're very narcissistic about how does this affect my job? How does it affect what I'm doing? How does it? And you're thinking about this kind of thing. Well, I have the big office. He doesn't have the big office, so he's not going to get that promotion. Well, isn't that what he's just kind of tweeting? So it's kind of funny because, you know, he works in the consensus, if you want to say, for lack of a better word, of the American people. So what is his business environment? I mean, his White House is also where he's quote unquote living. I mean, you know, because I say quote unquote because many presidents live there, and that's where the president lives. That's where we know him to be. But he also has his other locations. Yet again, you know, this is kind of office, you know, kind of water cooler conversation, but he doesn't really have an office in a water cooler. I mean, he's the president. He's got people that come in and he's got to work through different situations that he's readjusted to what his, you know, qualifications are to be there. How we said he's readjusted what the presidency is. You know, he's kind of made it different in what.
So the only thing that I hear what you're saying, I just think that, my question now becomes, because if you go to the energy, he's been stuck in the same pattern, whether you want to call it a habitual response that he has. And, you know, you read his books. I didn't read them. And I'm just, you know, what you've told me is, you know, that was a lot of his history. He goes out and he argues with people. And that's where he kind of, we talked about that, his energy. And so I kind of would wonder at some point, if it's like that's what your expertise is, and he's very good at defining it, don't you want to move on? Like, don't you want to do something new, something different, and handle it in a different way? Not as a back down, as, oh, I'm succumbing to what it's what I'm trying to get across, that we said this to Oprah, why she should run. It's because it's doing something different. It's exposing, and not for other people, for herself, a different part of her to run for president. And for him, I would think that this response is so, like, Isn't he sick of it? Like, wouldn't he want to do something more to expand more of who he is as a person? It's got nothing to do with anyone else. And actually, when we talk about Oprah running, that's why I feel like she is going to have to. It's got nothing to do with people. It's got everything to do with her own self-development. I would think it's something that's out of your comfort zone. So Trump goes in and he says, I'm in the White House and they're not. You could, however you want to define it, but it still goes back to his old habitual responses. And I would think for him, I'm using the same logic on him. Wouldn't he want to do something different? And that's what's interesting is when I look at the book that we wrote, why I keep going back to it is because it's just perspective. Right. It's changing the way that you look at everything that's been done, everything that's been said. And we did many of them from Oprah's standpoint, but even from Trump's standpoint, I see this and I'm like, oh my gosh, he must have listened. He must have read it, because now he's responding to it. And it's like he feels something and he's not responding in a, he's got to feel something that, I'm sick of the same response.
So you bring up a lot of very fascinating things, a lot of things, and that little great outburst there. You bring in a lot of great points, because we know he's changed the skill set of the presidency, and this can be aligned to all of us, because you go in and you do something and you get stuck in that pattern, like you were saying. So he's changed the skill set. But if you're still around a bunch of galoops, really, there's no empowerment there to get you moving and to get you making deals and to get you going out there. And we don't know what he's doing on the side. He could just be throwing this as a slab of meat into the American public, and they're just ready to slobber all over it. What's he saying? What's he? And, the funny thing is, people love to talk at the water cooler or whatever the heck you want to say now, in the break room, blah, 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 about what's going to happen, what could, the gossip. But people live on that in an office environment. And in the White House, if you're not political and you're not, again, I've never been there. I've, consumed a lot of different things about it, whether it be reading interviews, books, not just from Donald Trump or about Donald Trump. And it's kind of contrived to the sense of, there's political people there. And even if you look at who's, again, who's thrown their hat in the ring to run, the playing field's getting huge, yet he's changed the skill set. So who else is equatable to his skill set? Oprah, who's been in that environment. And if you're looking for, someone, and we've said this before, I don't play golf, I've played tennis, but if you're looking for someone to play a tennis game with, you want someone who's, at your level or better. You want someone better. Exactly. You don't want someone exactly. You want someone better. Because you want to
do more.
And if someone's in that alignment of that same industry, you don't want someone from the political realm who's going to hunker it down to all that. That's going back in the past.
Right.
And there's no one that's thrown their hat in the playing field, to say, that had their hat in the ring, to say, hey, I want to run, and, this is wild.
So, it's funny. I just heard when you were saying that, because that was a great leap. When people were pushing Oprah to run, there you go, to run, she had said, I guess, whether it was through a tweet or whatever, Trump said, I already know what her weakness is. This tweet tells me what his weakness is. And it's funny, because when I was out today, all I kept thinking is people tell you their weaknesses all the time. All the time. If you just listen, they tell you their weakness. And I hear it all the time. I hear people's weaknesses all the time. And I don't react to it unless you come after me or you come after someone I really love. And I go right for the jugular, and I feel terrible afterwards, and I retract it really soon, because I don't like doing that. But if you don't take anything personal, people tell you their weakness all the time. And this right here tells me exactly what his weakness is. And even more than what we said in the past. It's like, oh my God, it's almost, actually, it's funny, because we keep talking about his weakness throughout our podcasts, and we don't do it so much in the book, because we just focus on the energy. Yet this tweet makes it very clear. And so if Oprah were to run, I mean, here's the, if I got to believe he's going to be the hardest, opponent. He would be the most, significant opponent out there. I mean, as opposed to some of these other people we've seen who are going to run, and it's like nothing.
Well,
so,
his kind of past MO is that he's looked for that strong opponent. I mean, he's looking for a good competitive, bolt of.
Right.
And if there's nothing there, I mean, we all know. You go to a job and you're kind of in a deficit, and you're like, all right, I'll go to Dunkin' Donuts. All right, I'll go to, and I'll let's go to lunch, okay? And you start, pumping out these things that aren't really, they're just distractions. They're not really where you want to go to get that empowerment to move forward. And so when you're in that political playing field, and I have to imagine, I've never lived in Washington, D.C. I've drone through it, but you have to imagine it's all, that's important because, it's the same thing, probably about being in Silicon Valley, about being anywhere. If you're having all of the same and that energy in that environment, I mean, where do you look for something different? You want a different conversation. It makes perfect sense that, he would find this different conversation to want to propel from. Why wouldn't you? And that's why we're saying, hey, Oprah, hello, here's a different conversation. What are you going to do with it? We know you're out there listening as well, and we're not going to say why, but, that's cool. And we're having this conversation to kind of ask that.
We're trying to actually have a conversation that no one else has. Talking about the energy, going into the science that supports the energy and thinking about it differently. And that's what I think can also come from an Oprah Trump campaign.
Yes. Well said. Thank you for listening to this production from EI Alliance. Check out our Amazon authors pages for books and podcasts, along with our Donald Trump and Oprah books for this series. Find great music by New Threads on iTunes, Spotify, and on newthreads.us.